All right. Well, good morning, everybody. This is Jomo Stewart, Jim Dotson, Mr. Roger Burgraff here at the Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation. It is Tuesday, August 31st, the last day of August, 2021. We're here for the Energy for All Alaska Task Force meeting, and we are blessed to have with us this morning as our guests the team at the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation. We have Commissioner Brune with us, along with Cindy Heil, Ms. Alice Edwards, here to discuss air quality, a long-running challenge here for the Fairbanks community, but one we're working hard across the community and really across the state to address. And so we had a really good presentation by the department at the Chamber Energy Natural Resource Committee, and I thought that the group would benefit from having that presentation as well. Certainly having a discussion regarding air quality regulation here in the Fairbanks North Star Borough. Things new to the discussion regarding local air quality, and perhaps a little bit of a preview of any regulatory actions that we might be coming or that we might need to take over the course of this burn season, this heating season. So without further ado, if I may, I'll hand it over to Team DEC, please.
Thanks, Jomo. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Excellent. And good morning to everyone, especially Roger. Always great to see my friend Roger and everyone else. Thanks so much for taking the time to meet with us this morning. And obviously, I'm fortunate to have the smart people at DEC with me today. Alice Edwards is the Director of Air, and Cindy Heil is the person who probably most of you have worked very closely with on this issue. Like Jomo, you said, we did give a presentation to the Fairbanks Chamber a few weeks ago. We want to make sure that we're giving an update to each of you so that you understand the progress that we're making, the accountability that we're trying to hold EPA to, as they're holding themselves to a different standard than they're holding us and the point source folks, and to talk a little bit about that today, what we're doing with respect to wood stoves, and what progress we've heard with respect to BACT and other issues. Jomo, does that seem to match with what your hope was for today's presentation?
Better than. So yes, sir. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, I am going to turn it over to Alice, and we're obviously going to give an update on each of those things. And at any point, if you have questions, feel free to raise your hands or interrupt, and we'll do our best to address the questions, because I know there's a lot out there, but I want to just continue to mention that we're making progress. We're making progress, significant progress toward attainment. And that's thanks to a lot of the work that this group has done, that the Chamber has done, and that the people in the communities of Fairbanks and North Pole have made. And we're hoping to continue that progress and get to attainment and have the air quality improve while not having an adverse impact on the people and the economic activities that go on in Fairbanks and North Pole. So with that, Alice, I'll turn the floor over to you, and looking forward to everyone's questions.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Alice Edwards, the Director for the Division of Air Quality. I'm down in Juneau today. Cindy, can you do me a favor and take your internet screen and make that full screen on your screen, because we can see a lot of your tiles in the background. Thanks. So, as the commissioner said, we've got a few topics we just recently did a presentation on. One of the first things I think we wanted to make you all aware of is that we did do the first time ever we've done an actual annual progress report. It's available up on our website, and we did this jointly with the borough, so you can see the things that we've been working on in the past year. This year was also a year where we had a progress report due to EPA, so you can also see the formal progress report to EPA on this website. It's a lot more technical report. The annual report's a little more digestible, as it's just easier to get through. So hopefully that will be useful to you all in understanding sort of what we've been working on over the last year with respect to all the different programs that are going on in Fairbanks, from Fairbanks and North Pole, from the change out program to curtailments. All of that's the data is all listed out there in that report.
And I'll just show you real quick. Remember the website that has everything. It's right here. Progress and annual reports is where you can find this information, where the first annual report is located.
Cindy, can you click into the report just so you can get a sense of what that
Yeah.
looks like?
Absolutely. So this was co-developed with the Fairbanks North Star Borough because it contains all of the Fairbanks, since Fairbanks North Star Borough runs the change out program. So it has an overview. It gives all the latest of the design value information, the latest on our targeted airshed grant work, all the different control programs, like the highway signs that are coming next winter. It does give, there's lots of tables. We're going to keep the historical data. So as every year, we will just append and amend tables of data so that we can provide the historical. So next year in April, there'll be a 2021 column here, and we'll update the text. So this kind of tells you how much outreach we did, and whatnot. So it has all the different kinds of where the money is, where is it coming from, what's the how many alerts we called, what kind of stages they were in both communities, and things like that.
Oh, that's nice. And I also saw there in the table of contents a note on the kiln. I saw mass transit. So it looks fairly comprehensive.
Yes, we tried really hard to go out and find out things from fast planning. We found things from, we reached out to Aurora to get their latest information, so that we're really trying hard to have a comprehensive overview. It's not just what we do, where we can. And I think we have stuff on the natural gas efforts as well.
All right, and yet accessible. I saw 25 pages. Okay, thank
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I do think the idea there was, as we said, is, we want to highlight what we're doing that's related to the state implementation plan, but we also wanted to be able to highlight what's been going on in the community, which may not be fully captured in our air quality plan, because things are always, of course, evolving and changing, and you all are doing some great work up there, both with the penetration of natural gas into the community, but also with things like the new kiln and other projects that are going on up there. And if we know about them, we'll try to highlight them in the report as well.
Right. And so our next report is due. We're going to hope to try to post it by April 15th. So if you guys have information you want to have included in there, please feel free to let us know. We're trying to put this more to the public, whereas the SIP is written for EPA mostly. So hopefully if there's any improvements you would like to have, or things we could do a little differently, we always could take feedback.
you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Oh, so there's a picture of it. I had a picture of the table of contents. We also, yeah, so it was fast planning, their transit, their natural gas, the kiln, our model update, and then our conclusions. So
then the next thing I think we wanted to just give you a short update on was the best available control technology work that's being done with the industrial sources in the community. I think you are, many of you are aware that we are required under as a serious non-attainment area to implement the best available controls. We went through that process. There was the big stakeholder process up there, and we looked at the best available control measures as well as the best available control technologies. We have been moving forward on those best available control technologies, which are the control, potential controls for the major industrial sources in the non-attainment area. In the plan, we had made those back determinations and included the specific requirements and timelines for each of the major facilities up there. We have received permit applications from every facility that was required to submit one, and we have been issuing those permits. In the meantime, as you know, EPA has oversight over our plan, and so we've submitted 2 iterations of the serious state implementation plan. The original one, which had the back determinations, and then a second one that went in last December, which was addressing primarily the 5% emission reduction requirements. So they have the original serious plan as well as amendments to it. As EPA has been reviewing that, those plans, they've been requesting more information and analysis specifically from some sources, from all the sources up there, looking for more source specific detail on costs and feasibility that they thought would be helpful in justifying and making those back determinations. We don't know for sure when EPA will take action on the backed portion of the SIP. Earlier this year, they had published some initial actions on some aspects of the serious SIP, but not all. They haven't taken action on the best available control measures or the best available control technologies yet. And so that as they work through that and not knowing exactly when we may get those proposals from them on whether they approve our DEC's back determinations, that's been resulting in some uncertainties for the industrial facilities, unfortunately. And in the case of the military base Doyon, it's delaying. They've been proceeding to implement the controls that were outlined in the plan, but the uncertainty from EPA has resulted in some delays, as we just want to make sure we're all proceeding in the direction that ultimately will be approved by EPA. I don't know if there's any questions on stationary source programs, or Commissioner, if you have anything else you want to say about BACT. I know that DEC, we stand behind our BACT determinations, and we strongly feel that what we have is appropriate, but we do know that EPA is looking for some more information on those sources.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. I think you just hit the nail on the head. We're very confident in what we submitted in the SIP 18 months ago, and we're asking EPA, and I've asked multiple times over the course of the last 18 months for them to approve that. We're just awaiting word on it. And I think a number of you have heard, I've expressed significant frustration over the additional work that they're asking the point source folks to do, especially when we know the root cause of the issue is wood smoke, and that the point source folks are not a significant contributor to the issue. We have been pushing them very hard, and every additional dollar that needs to be spent on this is, in my mind, unnecessary. But at the end of the day, they're the ones that have the final approval on the SIP. So the additional information that we can get will only help bolster our case. And we're confident with what we submitted. So Alice, I think you hit that nail right on the head.
We do have a question. I see a hand up. Mr. Soley.
Thank you, Domo. Commissioner, appreciate you being here today and kind of following up on the presentation at the chamber recently. The BACT, the best available control technology, is one of the issues that brought the business community into this PM 2.5 discussion some years ago. And the concern over, just as you say, that the point source are not the problem with our PM 2.5, and yet being penalized by the EPA. I guess specifically on the measurement of the emissions, we've talked over the time about creating a model, doing a preceptor test, and I'm wondering about why we wouldn't do that before we as in you and the EPA require this backed by the point source. Because I feel like we're not using science, and you're guilty until proven innocent rather than the other way around. We're actually saying the point sources are guilty of the pollution, and yet we haven't taken the time to do the science to actually determine that.
Thanks, Rick. Good to see you. And just to be very clear, we're not saying that they're guilty. In fact, I think I said the opposite, that they're not significant contributors to it, but we've got to be able to prove that to the EPA. And I know that there's been a request for the precursor study and the changes to the model. And Cindy and Alice, we're going to be going into that. That's not just something we can just flip a switch on, though. That's a multi-year process, a very significantly time-intensive and cost-intensive process to try to change that model. And that's something that we were planning on later on in the presentation talking about. But that is our intention, to do just exactly what you're talking about, so that we have that additional data. But in the time that we had, you have to realize we were already late in submitting the SIP. And that's why we're in the situation that we're in, because nothing was submitted. So we did the best with what we had, and then we're going from there, and we're developing a new model that will give us additional data that will help us make even better decisions. Hopefully that helps, Rick. And I know Cindy and Alice are going to go into detail on
Okay,
that
so I'll wait for
Yeah.
the rest of my answer, but I want to, because I may have some more questions when we get there, but thanks.
Thanks, Rick.
So actually, this is about where we segued in the last time. So
Perfect. Go forth, Cindy.
so we made this, I'm hoping at some point to put another web page up that will have this. We will maintain and update. We're also working on a slight overview that goes into a little bit more detail of what I'm going to present to you. And then which is an overview of a very technical report that's at EPA right now. So all three documents at some point we hope to post. But this was a we have posted with our other presentation we did with the chamber. This gives our model status and process. So it takes, just to be honest, the first model that we ever created back in 2008 to 2011, I mean, it's about 3 to 4 years to develop a model that's approved by EPA. So for us to update our existing model, we started right away. As when we finished the amendments to the 2020 to meet the Clean Air Act requirements, that got submitted in November of 2020, and then we did the original serious SIP in November of 2019. So 2019 we submitted a thing, and then another in November of 2020. For us to make all that, it was a pretty major lift. Most other communities, I would say, have not been able to do what we did. So as soon as that was submitted, we had already started on trying to do a model. EPA was trying to make us commit to doing a model update within the SIP. We're doing the model update, but there's no guarantee that even once we get this model updated, that it's going to give us the information we need. So we did not put that commitment in our SIP. So the first phase is just to update the software. So the CMEC model, which is the name of the model, originally was the version was 4.7.1, and we've now updated it to 5.3.2. That required a whole new framework to host it because it was very intensive computer system wise. It takes 16 processors to run this model, but now we're able to do a little bit faster. And we built we also have a contractor who's got it, and we did an identical system. So we have 2 systems that will hopefully help us run things faster. Previously, it took over 30 days to 60 days to do model runs. So it was something that really takes a lot of time. So now we have the framework built. We have the model version. We ran both 4.7.1 and 5.3.2 with the old data, just to see what the model would do. How does it affect organic carbon? How does it affect? So we understand how it works, right? So we did all that. We wrote a paper, and it's to EPA because EPA has to approve every step we have. So all this does is just gave us like a shell. It gave us a model of just this version, and it's now ready to start getting Alaskanized, for lack of a better word. So now what we have to do is we've just started phase 2. And phase 2 is now we have to evaluate it and Alaskanize it. So we have to run a bunch of diagnostics and model performance where we compare the model, the raw model outputs with the actual monitored data from NCORE and Hearst Road. So we start, it's not the proper terms, but I think it's easier to understand. We're validating it. We're fine tuning the model to meet the data that's going to come out of Fairbanks. It doesn't do us any good if it's just off the shelf for anything in the United States. We need it to be tweaked and refined to match. So ideally what you're trying to do is you want the model outputs to match the actual data that was collected on that particular day. So we have to feed in all the meteorology. This is what we use, what's called a WRF model. So we had picked a new episode of 88 days. So it's pretty much the whole entire winter versus two-week episodes that came out of 2008. So we think we're going to have a much better, we have a lot more data now, so we're hoping a much more refined model, so it's more accurate and the performance is better. Because remember, our existing model that we used the Sirius SIP for had no data from the Hearst Road monitor, even though it's our violating monitor. There was no meteorology from that area. There was no speciation data, so what was actually on the filters. So now in this phase 2, we're putting all that data, all the new meteorology that was collected over this past winter, all the new filter data that came over from this last winter, we're putting into this model to Alaskanize it. We're not gonna be able to done with that until this spring. Shooting for March, and then it's going to take EPA 2 to 3 months to verify that we did everything properly and followed all the rules. Okay, so we're thinking this, maybe the early summer, we might have a model that's now can be used in Alaska, but it can't be used for regulatory purposes. Because even when we get through all that and use all that data, information off the filter, meteorology data, right? Now the model has to be ready for regulatory purposes. In order to do that, then we have to load it with a new 5-year modeling design value. We have to pick a new base year. We have to have a new emission inventory. We have to update all these other minor models that work with that. And the reason we have to do this is that what we're trying to do is say, okay, here's our model. Here's what it is at this point in time. And we bring in all of the data we can. So what's called emission inventory. So we've already got all the hourly data from the point sources. We'll feed that in. We're going to get all the actuals. So these are all actual data for a new model year, base year. And then we use these other things and we predict out to the future what's going to happen in the future. And that's what this whole model is about, is trying to predict the future based on actuals that you have right now. So it's only when we have this already in phase 3 and all this other stuff is loaded, can we, at this final thing way down here at the bottom, is do the precursor runs that would allow us to know whether or not we can do a precursor for SO2 and get the point sources out of it.
Hey, Ms. Heil,
Mm-hmm.
what's the interplay with all of this relative to the backed decision? With cost of energy being like the major, a very major factor here in this community, what we want to avoid at all cost is getting anyone to pay any more for anything than they absolutely have to.
That's a whole separate thing, not with this model. When you get to the economics, and that's different than what the model does. So the model is, and it's why it's so important, right? Because it looks at actual emissions and tries to project actual emissions. So when you do when we did the backed analysis and we made our determinations, we based it on technologically or economic feasibility. And so that's where we used the economic issues and tried to make the point that economically, the types of controls that they want to put on these point sources were, we deemed them economically infeasible. And so we took them off the table. And that in the state determinations, we found a way that was economically and technologically feasible for the area. What the model update's trying to do is, if you can model that the sulfur is from the point surface is below this de minimis level, then you can say they're not the problem and they don't have to do any controls on that pollutant. So we were successful in doing a precursor for NOx, for example. We actually did a comprehensive, which means we looked at all sources of NOx in the entire community, ran the models, and proved to EPA, and they proposed to approve this, that we don't have to do, the point sources don't have to do any controls on NOx, and you don't have to, the community doesn't have to have an inspection and maintenance program back to handle the NOx issues from vehicles. So the NOx precursor was very important, and it was a huge step forward, and that EPA has proposed to accept that document and that analysis. The problem with SO2 is there is what's called sulfate on the filters. We don't know where it comes from. It's an atmospheric chemistry that happens in the air. You know, SO2 is converted to SO4, and SO4, which is sulfate, is on the filters. EPA, we can account for most of it, but there's a good portion that we don't know where it comes from. EPA's assertion is that we have to assume that 100% of the unaccounted for sulfate is from point sources. And when you do that, then they don't meet the precursor requirements. We think that's bogus, for lack of a better term, but that's what we're stuck with.
So that gets me to a perception I've had regarding the EPA, which is that essentially, I don't want to call them lazy, but they'll have a tendency to want to reach out and touch those who they can reach out and touch easiest. And just impose things based on, you know, well, as you just noted, some assumptions.
Right. Well, the other thing is you have to understand is that, you know, Region 10 tries really hard to help us, but they ship our stuff to headquarters and they look at it from a national lens. And they really look at, you know, we look at things nationally. Every single coal-fired plant has control measures above and beyond anything that Alaska has. I mean, we have coal-fired plants that don't have control measures for sulfur, and every other control measure, every other power plant in the nation. So they look at it from a national perspective, and here's these outliers, and they need to be corralled in and treated like everybody else, right? And so we keep trying to say, you know, one size does not fit all, we're special. We really are. But that's the uphill battle we have. And plus, they always take things more conservative. They'd rather err on the side of being more conservative than less conservative, because you are dealing with health-based standards and health. So it's a delicate balance. Not trying to, it's just that, you know, when you look at it, they tell us all these things. I don't agree with them, but, you know, just to give you a perspective.
I'll just add one further thing that, you know, I've had that discussion with the EPA that they're, in their requests that they've made to Doyon and to the base, they're spending our tax dollars. They're spending monopoly money. We have what, 30-some trillion dollars in debt, and they're asking the base to do additional work that is unnecessary. And every extra dollar on that is a dollar too much. We stand by the decisions that we made. Alice and her team made excellent decisions for both economic and technical infeasibility for the BACT. We are implementing the BACT that we put in the SIP already, as Alice indicated, with the permits that we're reissuing. We need that certainty the point source folks want that certainty, and we need it sooner than later. And so every extra dollar that they're asking us to run is unnecessary, or to spend on this is unnecessary in my mind. And so Lou, I do see you have a question as well.
Well, hi, Jason. Thanks, and Alice, thanks for doing this. It's not a question so much as to say, to support what you're saying. So based on the state's existing plan, we are already preparing to implement a level of sulfur control that'll actually reduce the SO2 in the non-attainment area. And really what we're arguing with the EPA over is whether to go and make it take more SO2 out at a very high cost. So from our perspective at Doyon, the state has already set out the requirement, and we're trying to meet that requirement. It will actually take SO2 out of the atmosphere, but we need the back determination to support what the state has already implemented, because the alternative technology solution is just ridiculously expensive.
Yep. Thanks, Lou. And our model shows that we will be in attainment by 2024. And frankly, the work that Fairbanks and North Pole has done already has decreased the PM levels by over 50% already. So the work that you all are doing is fantastic. What we show with the work and the sulfur controls and the other controls that we've put in our SIP is going to have an even better impact. And I think that, what we're going to talk about as well is how we're trying to hold EPA's feet to the fire for their oversight of the wood stoves, and making sure that the wood stoves, which are the root cause of the air quality issue, that what we're replacing in Fairbanks is actually replacing an older stove with a better, newer stove. And we're not confident that the EPA, who has the responsibility to both audit and certify and audit the stoves that are being sold, is doing what they need to be doing. And so that's what we're going to be going into next. I do see that Rick has a question as well.
Yes, and so we do have hands. Well, why don't we get to those comments or questions? But yes, we're at the bottom of the hour and we're rounding the horn. So yeah, I want to save time. I know that we've only scratched the surface of this presentation and discussion. So Lou.
Oh, sorry. I thought I had lowered my hand. Please go on.
Okay. Rick, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Commissioner, thanks. And just to spin around on this a little bit more and help me understand. So could we delay the requirement until your model's complete? I guess I know what the EPA is saying, and they've said a lot of things, and they told us stuff some years ago. And of course, as you point out, we're late in responding. But we're getting our homework in, and we continue to get our homework in. And I believe that we are making good grades on attainment. Thanks for all of our work and you guys helping. But because of the impact is so significant, what if we said we're delaying? We're not going to implement these until after we get the model up and going, which it sounds like from Cindy, it's going to be next spring or something.
Well, that gets us in phase 2, but phase 3 is going to be beyond that. Ideally, I think you've hit what we've kind of been talking about is really we need time, and what we need time for is we need the 2022 to 2023 fuel switch that's going to happen. That's mandated by September 1, 2022 to go into place, and get the data from that fuel switch to see how much reduction is happening on the filters from the lower sulfur in home heating, which is where we think the majority of the sulfate is coming from. So that would put it into 2023. I don't know if they're going to hold that, or it could be, there's a lot of timing issues. All right. So what's happening is that we submitted a an amendment to the SIP, like I said, in November of 2020. EPA did not deem a completeness determination of that SIP amendment. So it defaulted after 6 months after we submitted it, it became complete. EPA has 1 year from that date. So that would be November plus 6 months. They have a year. So in the spring of 2022, they need to make an action. If they propose an action at that period of time, then it'll go through that regulatory process, right? So they have to propose, take comments, then do a final action, which probably the fall of 2022. If they deem us incomplete or had deficiencies, that would trigger 18-month clock. Okay, so another 1.5 years before we would have to submit a new SIP that would fix the discrepancies. Well, that puts us into 2023, 2024, which we're always supposed to be making attainment. So there is probably, that's when we would probably use the new model, and everything would be to address any kind of deficiencies EPA would propose and finalize. So it'd only be after the effective date with that 18-month sanction clock turn on. So there's still a lot of time. EPA is pushing, to do some actions. We're expecting an action this fall, finalizing what they proposed this spring and approving all of our wood regulations as SIP strengthening, but we don't know when they're going to do BACT or BACM, which could be next year at some point, timing wise. They're not, like I said, they're not, federally required until the spring of 2022. So I think the time is there. Unfortunately, because this is adversely impacting Doyon, we could have gotten real emission reductions when they were done much sooner than that, which would help. I mean, having real emission reductions in a timely fashion is what we want, right? And they've kind of messed us all up.
Alice, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think to just more directly talk to Rick's question about why can't we just wait on some of this, and the reality is that the Clean Air Act says we have to act as quickly as possible, and for BACT, I think it was within 4 years of our being redesignated to serious. We had to have BACT in place, which is why the permit applications were coming in last summer. That was at the 4-year mark. And as Cindy had talked about, if our plan is found deficient, it turns on the sanction clock, right? And we have time to correct it. Well, if we don't plan or if we don't implement our plan, we are also subject to sanctions. So the fact that we have a plan that we've adopted at the state level and have submitted to EPA, we don't wait for EPA to approve that to implement that plan. And because we need to implement it, and if we don't implement it, we could be subject to sanction. So we have to keep moving. That the way the rules and the laws are structured is we have to continue to keep moving and keep making improvements, which is frustrating when you have a technical issue like this, a science-based issue where we really are trying to better understand sulfate in the community. There's a lot of research going on in the community. The university is doing a lot of research. So there's a lot of work being done, but this one particular precursor pollutant we are struggling with from both the science and technology base. But the rules still say we have to continue to move forward.
Speaking of all of this, and I should not do this, but I'm going to ask. So we've heard from Doyon Utilities, but where do GBEA and the university stand in all of this?
Well, EPA has also asked for additional information from those facilities as well. And so all of the facilities have had conversations with EPA about what EPA would like to see to better understand and justify the back determinations that were made. So all the facilities are going through this process with EPA as far as having these conversations, and each facility is I think, doing what they can, making their decisions on how they want to proceed as far as providing additional information. And I think some of them are working with EPA as well on trying to provide some additional information that may be helpful to making those final backed determinations or getting them approved. Both the university and Aurora Energy, we had made an economic and feasibility argument for those. EPA has been asking for some more technical information and economic information in support of that. And then GVEA, I think they've been looking at the transitions for the fuels. With GVEA, the real question has been going to a lower sulfur number one fuel versus going to ultra low sulfur diesel, which is in this plan for a few years out. And I think EPA has been looking at that and the timing of that. So EPA is asking questions of all of these sources. So all of the sources are definitely engaged on this issue at some level. And I'm sure for us and for them, it's a frustrating position to be in. And as the commissioner said, I think we'd all like to see that certainty be there for the sources. We think that the plan that was approved is the right plan for the community and that it makes sense and that it does meet the backed requirements. But EPA is doing its due diligence and they may or may not agree with us. So they're trying to gather some additional information in support of making a decision at their level. And that will come out as a proposal that people can comment on here in the future.
Well,
Domo, I know we have only 15 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure we get to the root of the presentation on wood stoves. So
yes, and that's where I was about to go. I hope Team DEC can stay late. Here at FEDC, we do not have a fixed stop point. So just know that we can go further, longer if we need to. Ms. Lorelei?
Hey, thanks. I appreciate some time. I just wanted to chime in here that UCBelly's position is that it's inappropriate for the EPA to be asking the point sources for additional information. They are not our regulator. It is DEC. We sent a letter to Commissioner Brune a couple of weeks back now saying exactly that the information that the EPA is asking from us will be so costly just to collect. And again, it has negligible benefit to the entire process. So we've basically said we don't intend to reply to the EPA. DEC is our regulator. And if DEC requires this information from us, then they should ask us directly. So, just adding that to the conversation as we have almost all parties on the call, particularly the other point sources. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Well, if there's nothing further on that item, we'll go ahead and proceed. As we continue to rage against the law of diminishing returns, we can move over to the wood stove item.
Okay, well, I'm going to go pretty fast on this, but I will show something that I didn't show at the chamber. And that is, this is an EPA website, and EPA is posted, because we were total pains in the butts to them, letters that they submitted to all their labs. And I wanted to point out this letter that came out in February, where EPA has confirmed that the work that we've been doing, they checked our work. So if you see here that the findings identified by Alaska reveal that there are serious and systematic problems to be addressed in the testing and third-party certification process. So EPA is stating this. What we're doing, what I'm going to talk to you about next, it has been completely validated by EPA. They also went further to down here to say that if the labs if such issues are not resolved, the EPA will proceed to revoke the EPA approved lab status. So they're actually talking about accreditations and their approvals in writing, and they posted all these letters. So wood stoves. So wood stove emission standards are really important. They're really important to Fairbanks because PM 2.5 is predominantly caused by wood smoke. This presentation is posted, so you guys can read all this if you want to. Understanding this, back in 2019, we set up our regulations to require that just because somebody was EPA certified, a device was EPA certified, didn't necessarily mean that it was going to be up on the approved list. So we established the ability in regulations to have an Alaska, a DEC approved list, and that only devices on this approved list could be sold in the non-attainment area. So one of the reasons we did this was, let's see. So yeah, so we set this all up because we were faced with BACM, which is best available control measures, that Missoula, Montana has a control measure that says 0.1 grams per hour, which is essence a pellet only program. We were faced with having to do a pellet only program in Fairbanks. It was very clear from the stakeholder comments and the comments we've received over time that a pellet only program is not something the community was going to be very supportive of. So we had to come up with another way to try to deal with wood stoves and get what we want is the best performing wood stoves. It's not just a number. That's like the basis. So you have EPA certified number, but then we want to make sure we have a good performer as well. So our list is based on the EPA certification. We check to make sure it's on the EPA device. Then we apply the state emission standards, and then we look at the underlying test data is reviewed for acceptance. And we've been reviewing all these test reports. So we found, as indicated in EPA's letter, we found huge systematic errors in the EPA certification program. We don't know if new wood stoves coming in are actually cleaner than the wood stoves that are coming out. That's how scary it is. We think it has long-term impacts on our ability to actually improve our air quality. So just to understand what the EPA certification process is, I mean, it looks robust from this perspective. A wood stove prototype is designed, manufacturer contracts with a lab and a third-party certifier. They select a test method. They send a note to EPA giving them 30 days heads up that they're going to be testing. The lab conducts a test, the lab writes reports, then the manufacturer sends that report to a third-party certifier, independent third party supposedly. That third-party certifier reviews the test and says, okay, it's complete. Then he gives it back to the manufacturer, then the manufacturer puts all this data into an application. EPA reviews, gives the appliance, certifies the appliance for 5 years. And then every 5 years after testing, EPA can renew the certification without requiring any more tests. So a device can go in, get tested one time and have certification up to 30 years, which is what happened in the 1988 new source performance standards. Is you had, as long as the manufacturer doesn't change the engineering of the device, all they have to do is request a renewal and they get another 5-year extension and they can just renew. So you have one shot at pretty much on whether or not a device gets certified, and then it's in perpetuity until they change the NSPS. So also when they have some third-party inspections that happen, this is not EPA, but all this information is confidential business information. So we couldn't look at any about that. So they just a really quick picture of what a testing thing looks like. The stove is put on a measure scale. They measure the wood. They put it in. They measure this whole thing, and then they burn it off, so it's all gone. And then they extract the emissions and they do an analysis. So, as I mentioned, one time you do this test and you're done. May not ever. And EPA since 1988 has not completed any compliance audit testing, even though they've had the ability. but they've never done it. So what did we do? We looked at all the test reports, and what we did was we weren't telling people they couldn't come to us, come to Alaska because they did anything specific. What we said was, here's their test report, here's the rules. Did the test report meet the rules? That's all we did. And we found huge problems. We can't even, I don't even understand why some devices got certified because they were missing whole elements of the report. So if that was the case, how could EPA actually certify a device when everything was missing? So we corrected, we developed these spreadsheets. Each of these elements is related to a specific item in the new source performance standards. And each one of these elements, we wrote a regulatory justification document. All this is posted. We are trying to be so transparent because if we make a mistake, we want manufacturers to let us know, we'll fix it, right? But everything is transparent. We've put everything up on what we've done. We have a website where we've posted all of our lists, approved lists, our decision matrix, how we make decisions, why we made decisions, all the reports that come in, deficiencies, everything is posted. When we just briefly, we found 12 to 21 defects per report, and we found about 40 issues. We sent those to EPA. EPA came back with 12 more. Even when we had people had a chance to fix their report, they maybe have gone from average from 12 to 21 to 16 to 21 defects. Most of the significant issues is they never reported or even did parts of the test. So in our opinion, on average, there were at least from 8 to 9 items that would trigger by the rule revocation. So not just, oh, this is a paperwork issue. This is a revocation issue that in essence, they should never have been certified. There's also a lot of questions about test method use and whether they're just manipulating the test. This is an example of an owner's manual between a step 1 and step 2, which pretty much the only difference is they just did smaller weight, smaller length of wood, use less wood, smaller pieces, you get major emission reductions, but it's kind of artificial, all right? Even though they're telling the public that they can use 24-inch pieces of wood or 22 inches pieces of wood, they didn't, they tested 11 pieces of wood. There's a lot of contradictory in the information they're giving to the public. This is really scary. When an EPA certification report says that their maximum heat output was 23,000 BTUs, and yet the manufacturing material says it's 65,000 BTUs, 34,000, 95,000. 75% of the test reports that were reviewed, so that's over 220 test reports, 75% did not match or even come close. You know, there's some variation. If this was like in the 50s to 65,000, that would be probably more acceptable because the types of test methods that are being used. So we have some basic statistics. We've posted our statistics. Out of 132 cordwood stoves, we're down to 31. We've only allowed 31 to be on the DEC approved list. Remember, when we did this originally, there would have been no, if we would have held hard and true to the NSPS, there would be 0. But we're trying really hard to keep as many on the list as we can, but we really want them to be good performers. Pellet stoves, there's 96, and we were at 43. So even pellet stoves are not, even though pellet stoves are a much better stove because of how they're configured, and their emissions are much lower, and they're you know, for all purposes, that's why people have pellet only programs. We still dropped over almost half the number of stoves because of how poor the test reports were. So really what it comes down to is we don't have any confidence in the EPA certification program. If we had money, what we would do is we would take the best stoves or stoves that are sold the most in Fairbanks, and we would go do a verification test on those. We'd go buy the stove, take it to an EPA certified lab, and have them run the report with it recorded so that we knew exactly what they were doing. I think the labs felt that they have been, and this was across all labs, all manufacturers, okay? This wasn't just one lab, it was all the labs, is that they have been, there's been this culture that was like, well, if you go to all the money and the expense to build a stove and go get it tested, of course you pass. They've never denied a certification report ever. And statistically speaking, you'd think that somebody would have an oopsie-daisy and they would, need to correct their report. But up to this point, there has been no EPA certified tests that have been denied. That's changing now. When we brought all this up to EPA is slowly starting to work. They're re-reviewing all their reports. They are sending deficiency letters out to manufacturers. And EPA has told us that they will be sending out letters to at least 20, if not more, requiring retesting. So when they actually send these out, they're supposed to stop selling those models. But EPA hasn't told us when they're going to tell us who they are so we can make sure that they're not on our list. So, the EPA program has a tremendous lack of transparency. The report conclusions aren't EPA, ISO accredited third-party certifiers and labs are not following all the rule requirements. We can't rely on it. And this just is this letter I sent you before. So even though it's caused a lot of angst to our vendors, and that's really unfortunate, we're trying really hard to give them a advance notice. We've committed that if we find a stove that we want to remove from our list, we'll highlight it and give our local vendors 4 months advance notice so that they can adjust their inventory. Even if it's not on our approved list, they can still sell their devices if they have them in inventory outside the non-attainment area. And we're trying to work with them. And for example, Woodway came up and says, what happens if because it takes such a long lead time now for ordering and delivery. In good faith, they ordered, it was delivered. All that time has passed, we've pulled a device off the list, but it's already been paid for and delivered. We're telling them it's okay. You have to do your business. You did it in good faith. That doesn't mean that you have to stop for that particular device. It's a case-by-case basis, but we're not out here to cause a problem. We're trying really hard to work with our local vendors and not put them at a disadvantage. It's not their fault. So we trying to give advance notice. We're trying to work with them if they come into this, like they call it, like a catch-22. But if it's been purchased at the time that there was the device was on the approved list, then it's good to go in. So that's kind of in a nutshell about what's happening with the wood stove certifications. Anybody have any questions? That was really fast.
Actually, I don't have a question, Jomo, if it's okay. I'd like just to add that ultimately the goal is improving the air quality in Fairbanks and North Pole. And the work that Cindy and her team has done to hold EPA accountable is unbelievable. It is huge kudos to Cindy for finding this. The fact that we have spent tens of millions of dollars on stove changeouts, potentially replacing older stoves with newer stoves that don't perform any better, is dumbfounding to me. And the fact that concurrently the EPA is trying to hold us and the point source folks to a standard that they're not holding themselves is dumbfounding to me. And we're calling them out on it. The root cause of this issue is obviously wood smoke. It was a non-starter if we were going to go to what Montana had and get rid of wood burning stoves. We had to have them. We want to continue to have them, and we want to give predictability to the suppliers in Fairbanks and North Pole for what they're selling is going to be on our list. So we've made that commitment to Woodway and to others. But ultimately, again, what Cindy and her team have found on this is amazing, and it's holding EPA accountable. And we're going to continue to hold them accountable because it's just grossly inappropriate that they would continue to ask questions of the backed folks and yet not even look at themselves in the mirror. So that message has absolutely been delivered. We're keen on continuing to improve air quality, to make sure wood burning stoves are allowed, and to have as little economic impact on the people and the businesses that operate in Fairbanks and North Pole as possible. So again, huge kudos to Cindy, Alice, and their teams for raising this issue nationwide and making sure that as a foundation of my first science class that I took, replicability, to be able to take a study that you do here and to repeat it somewhere else, that's the foundation of science. And what Cindy was pointing out is they were burning the wood in one place and then doing the exact same study and not getting the same results. That's not science. That shouldn't be the foundation for regulatory decisions. We need to make sure that we're holding them accountable, and we are. So Cindy, again, I want to publicly commend you for the awesome work, to you and Alice and your teams for finding that out and for holding EPA accountable. And Mr. Chair, I believe that's the end of our presentation. So we're happy to take additional questions.
And before we head to questions, I just also wanted to give kudos to the air quality program at the borough, because they have been paying attention to this certification issue and have been adjusting their device changeout program, the changeout program, to try and ensure that the better devices are getting installed in the community. So I just wanted folks on this call to be aware that the borough staff are also, with the changeout program, are also paying attention, trying to ensure that that money is being well spent.
Good morning, this is Patrice Lee. I have a question.
Please, Ms. Lee, fire away.
Hi, good morning, Cindy. Thank you for the presentation. For a long time, many people have been advocating that we find a way to measure smoke at the point at which it's being released from a stack into the air, because that's what really matters in terms of what the people are breathing here. And that, of course, includes the need to have a lot of monitoring. So where do we stand on actually knowing what's coming out of stacks? Is there any change in the ability of ADEC to have protective measures?
So no, short answer. Long answer is we put it in our targeted airshed grant application, a request to verify emissions that are coming out of the smokestacks, and by using, NESCOM has developed a mobile, in other words, a source test ability for wood stoves. And we are hoping, if we get this targeted airshed grant with this little pilot project in it, we would be able to do some testing of what's happening with people's current stove. If someone agrees for us to be able to come in their house, measure their wood smoke from their existing wood stove, change out the wood stove, make another test with a new wood stove in the same house, and see if there's actually emission reductions. It's not perfect. It's not what you were wanting, because the technology is just really not there, but it gets us halfway there. You know, industry has source tests that can get out of the stacks, but on homes we don't. But there is some technology out there that gets us halfway, and we have put in a project in our latest application for the targeted airshed grants, and our fingers are crossed that we'll get that, and we'll be able to hopefully answer some of the questions, both what you've just said and what we have of whether or not our wood stoves are being changed out or actually improving. So it is in our application. We're hoping this fall, this winter, we'll hear whether we got that. We were awarded that grant, And then if we are, then we would shoot for trying to implement that project over the course of the next few winters. We budgeted and we requested to do 5 tests, five tests of set of 2. So in this little pilot project study, it doesn't help us right now. It's not going to help us in the near term, but we're hoping that it could help us long term.
Follow-up question, please.
Proceed.
Cindy, do you happen to know how many notices of violation were the final amount for the last burning season?
It's in our public report. I don't know that number off the top of my head, but we did put in to that public report all the NOVs, all the letters, all the numbers, and we will continue to do that.
Yeah, Patrice, thanks for that question. That's absolutely something that we can't have these requirements if we're not going to hold people accountable. So that is outlined in the report, and that's something we plan to continue to do on the days that we're asking folks to not burn. Obviously, we have to make sure that that requirement is being met. And so we do have folks out on the street looking for that and holding folks accountable. And we plan to continue to do that. And right now is the time for folks, if you want to let folks know that they can apply for their no ash waivers, no other alternative source of heat. Now's the time to be getting those applications in.
And
Is
I
that
was
something
going to
you have
say,
to-
I was
is
going
it
to
something
say,
you have to apply for on a yearly basis, or is it something that holds
It's a yearly basis.
on a yearly basis? Please, Ms. Edwards, sorry.
yeah, I was also going to say that as far as curtailment goes this coming winter, we should have some additional staff on the street, assuming we can hire them. We receive some grant funds to have some extra resources on curtailment. So we will have a few more people out from DEC on the roads observing during those inversion periods. So just, the effort is still being done there on the curtailment side.
Okay. I see Mr. Thielman has his hand up.
Yes, I do. I missed the first part of the presentation, so if this is a repeat or if it's been addressed, I apologize for that. But has there been any work done about the electrostatic particular eliminators?
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, there was work done, and it wasn't the greatest of news. I was very interested in that opportunity, and we wanted to make sure that we study them to see what the ESP's impact would be, and whether they would remove the particulate. We were excited at the opportunity, but when we ultimately tested them, we had some safety concerns that came from it. And Alice or Cindy, if you want to specifically address those.
All of the reports are posted. The Fairbanks North Star Borough did the majority of the testing. They were testing both electrostatic precipitators and aftermarket CATs, where you add on catalytic converters. It was safety concerns. There was a tremendous amount of buildup in the creosote. So DEC actually piggybacked on their study, and we did additional testing on some cordwood stoves because Fairbanks started on pellet stoves. And the bottom line is that they need to go back and do some more engineering, because we did it on a cordwood stove for 30 hours and completely plugged it with buildup and creosote, and it could be considered a fire hazard. So they were cleaning, but it didn't quite work how we had hoped.
Yeah, I have to follow up with that for our condo complex here, which we're burning diesel number 2, I believe. We looked at electrostatics to put up in the stack. There are very few manufacturers that really have a maintenance friendly, in a sense where, okay, once a month, like you change your oil, once a week, you clean the precipitators, the electrostatics, and the very few manufacturers give you that opportunity until you jump into more utility scale. Now, our apartment complex is right on that borderline. It's 3 buildings and 50 50 apartments. So they're two 90,000 BTU units, or not correction, 290,000 BTU units. And I was disappointed with them, but the ones that I found that did work looked very promising. We're going to put one in on the stack here. We just have to figure out where to put it because we need access to the stack in order to clean it. And yeah, okay, I'm right there with you.
Well, one of the things to, electrostatic precipitators is a very well-known control measure that industry uses. You might want to look at commercial grade level. When we talk to some of the Europeans who do use electrostatic precipitators, their recommendation was, given the size of America's wood stoves and pellet stove devices, that they recommended at a minimum it would be commercial grade, commercial sized electrostatic precipitators. So not home size. You gotta grade up, and they would be able to handle the volume.
So if I may, regarding the wood stoves, really change outs, or am I unmuted?
No, we can hear you.
Oh, good. Okay. So again, we have spent quite a bit of effort, time, and money changing out wood stoves. And again, everyone's acted in good faith and really based on the EPA's work and certifications. If it turns out that we need to do further change out, so first regarding wood stoves, what are the possibilities of having the federal government through grants assist in that process?
Well, they are, in the sense that the Target Airshed grant is federal funds. So the last few years, we've put an emphasis, the Fairbanks North Borough, they actually get the money, they run the program, they help when we submit the applications. It's been conversions. The vast majority of the change out money has been into conversions, and it's in our monthly report, our annual report, all the mix. So out of the 4 change out Target Airshed grants, only 2 had some wood to wood, but it's limited. And then we're only changing into pellets or catalytic converters because those seem to be a more robust, better performing wood stoves. The non-catalytic converters, which are wood stoves, which are the more problematic ones, are not eligible for change outs. And we did that a couple of years ago. Once we realized a lot of the data that hasn't been published yet, but we could see the writing on the wall, we fixed the terms and the conditions with EPA so that we knew what was going on. So I think we're in a good place because we've been very careful on how we've been spending our monies. So those are coming. There was a bill that Senator Murkowski was working on with Senator Carper, a national bill, and I only remember the acronym, which is AWERA. So if you're familiar with DERA, which is the Diesel Emission Reduction Act, they were trying to model a national program for wood stoves, which would turn over more wood stoves, and you didn't have to be the worst in the country to do it. So, Matsu, any place that's not quite in non-attainment, but it's close, or just basic, getting rid of trying to get these older wood stoves out. They have been trying to get that bill through Congress. I know they're still working on it. The issues that we brought up with the wood stove certification is very disconcerting, and we've briefed our congressional delegation, Senator Murkowski's office on this, and Senator Carper's office, and they're trying to build in protections so that if they were able to get WERA up and going, that it's good performing stoves are gonna get used. But our Senator Murkowski is really trying hard to get more federal help in changing out wood stoves, and not just in these serious non-attainment areas, but everywhere. Did that answer your question?
Yes, miss. I see you
Cindy?
come off of mute, Miss Lee.
Yes. Is there time for another question?
Yes, miss.
Okay, thank you. Cindy, do you know, and I apologize if you already answered this, at what point in the last few years did you realize that there was such a discrepancy between the testing and the actual results?
So we didn't know it was going to be this bad at all. We knew that there was, we've been partnering with NESCOM for the past 5 years. And about 3 years ago, the city of New York has put $7 million towards testing to develop a new test method for cordwood stoves. So when you're developing a new method, you go in and you compare it with existing stoves, right? And existing methods. And so that's when we started seeing, things don't seem quite right. And they were really concerned about non-catalytic stoves. It's one of the reasons why DEC proposed last year regulations that we would treat non-catalytic stoves and catalytic compelled stoves differently, but we got a lot of feedback that said we had to treat everybody equally. So we adjusted our regulations to treat everybody equally. But because we could see some of this study data in the development of this new test method, that there was really some problems with non-catalytic wood stoves, especially. Now, this wasn't the EPA certification. This was just non-catalytic wood stoves weren't very good performers. So we're like, okay, we got this data, we're looking at it, we're started trying to deal with that. Then we made our regs because we knew that there were some problematic stoves, just a few, we knew that there was a few stoves in this study, not all the stoves, just a couple. So we wanted to make sure that we had the ability to take these problematic stoves off once we got information on them. So we started looking at test stoves just to implement the DEC regs, right? 1 hour filters. We pulled the test reports just to get their 1 hour filter pull. Not all the stoves reported 1 hour filters. Well, why? Well, that's a requirement of the NSPS. So the more we started looking, the more we found. We didn't start out with this at all. Not in the slightest idea did we realize that this would happen. All we were trying to do is look at test reports on a 1 hour filter pull to see if they met our requirements, and that was it. If they met the requirements, they would have been on the list. But the more we looked, the more we found, until this whole big powder cake blew up. And that was probably within the last year and a half. So it's been recent. It's been recent.
So is it safe to say that some of that passage of the test results in your studies erroneously passed, could it have been a change in the EPA and who is in charge of adhering to regulatory testing methods?
No, this is nothing to do with politics.
I just wondered.
If you don't mind, if you don't mind, we've tread this one pretty good. And again, I believe we should also, I also want to offer my, I want to commend DEC again for doing that review and finding that those problems. Again, as Commissioner Brune said, in the end, really what we're trying to do is clean up the air, and we want to allow appliances, wood burning appliances. You're just trying to ensure that they're actually performing to spec, so that they will, in fact, help us clean up the air. Mr. Kraft.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the presentation today. I just have a question about these point sources and the fact that we're the only ones in the United States that don't have these NOx and SOx controls. And I'm just curious as to why out of the 600 LM6000s, we're the only one that doesn't have a control on it. And if you could expand on that a little bit for me, thank you.
Well, one, they do have controls. They do control their PM 2.5 very well. All right. There could be some. I'm not the point source person. I just know that they don't have the sulfur level controls that other ones in the lower 48 have, and why they don't, I would not be able to answer that.
I think sources have been retrofitted over time, across the country, for a variety of different reasons. Our particular coal-fired units are pretty small in comparison to many of the large coal-fired power plants in the country that do have tended to be controlled over time. So, you know, it's I think the evolution of the need in the state, community in which these other units reside will drive what kinds of controls that they have. But I do know our units are not particularly large coal-fired units in comparison to some of the major coal-fired plants that have been producing power across the US, and most of those have now been controlled for a variety of purposes, whether they has come up through their own permitting processes as they've needed to do things at the sources, whether it's been a result of a regional haze planning requirement or a non-attainment area planning requirement or state requirements. So I think each state's a little different in how those have been addressed over time. Obviously, the Clean Air Act has been around, about 50 years now. So it's, you know, over time, a lot of these sources have resulted in having controls put on them. The sources in Fairbanks have bag houses for their PM particulate matter emissions, but have not had a need, or maybe not a need, but have not had a reason or a regulatory reason to have had to put on the controls for the precursor pollutants.
Mike, thanks for that question. And I'll just add to what both Cindy and Alice have said that well, first of all, you look at the university's coal-fired plant, and that's probably the newest plant in the nation. And so obviously very, very recent technology. The other thing is just to say, Mike, that if we felt that it would have been economically or technically feasible to have added additional controls, we would have. And for some of the backed, we did, but we feel that what we have in place and what we've proposed in this SIP is going to address the air quality issues and to ultimately improve the air quality in Fairbanks and North Pole.
I was just wondering if there was a correlation between the SOx issue that you guys haven't been able to identify the sources of, and maybe some of the point source issues.
Actually, you mentioned regarding sulfur, you made the tie between not the large point sources, but our actual home heating furnaces and the fuel types. So again, I understand that there's going to be a requirement coming at some point for a transition over to number 1, which is lower sulfur than number 2 diesel. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I can try and speak to that. So because maybe we didn't say this very clearly. So the sulfur that we see in the community, there's a number of different potential sources of it. Usually it's coming from combustion of either coal or you know, distillate fuel. So but it's difficult to distinguish once it's on the filter what the source was originally, where it came from, right? So, and that's where our model has not performed well either for sulfur. So it's difficult for us to feel with certainty, have more certainty around what's going on with the sulfur and sulfate. And that's why there's a lot of research going on this. But we do have a variety of sources in the community that emit sulfur as a result of the fact that they're burning basically fuel oil or you know, diesel or coal. So the reason that the sulfur issue is we have sources at ground level, right? So we're working with high particulate concentrations during wintertime inversions when pollutants are trapped near the ground. The home heating sources, the space heating sources, commercial space heating sources that use fuel oil, either number 2 or number 1 fuel oil, are emitting down at that ground level for the most part. And that's where our monitors are. The point sources, the industrial sources, tend to have higher stacks. They tend to be emitting a little higher altitude. And so whether or not those emissions are penetrating down to ground level and being trapped, those are the kinds of questions that are a little more uncertain with the larger sources. The fuel oil switch that's coming, in the best available control measures that we had to look at, there are a number of communities that went to the what we call ultra low sulfur diesel for fuel oil. We made the argument, we made an economic argument that going to ULSD, as we call it, was uneconomic, but we did put in a requirement for fuel oil to shift to number 1. A lot of folks in the community do still use number 2 fuel oil. That will drop the sulfur content of fuel oil across the non-attainment area quite a bit. So it will reduce sulfur emissions, it will reduce sulfur at ground level. That's occurring not this year, but I believe next year is when that step down is to occur. And then the industrial sources are also transitioning their fuel, distillate fuel use down to lower sulfur fuels as well. In fact, some of them are going to the ULSD over time. The ULSD is an imported fuel for that community, which is an argument we've made with EPA. It's not produced at the refineries in North Pole, so all of the ULSD has to be imported in from either the Nikiski area or from, I believe, Valdez. So, so that was a concern. So there is a step down coming, I think about a year from now, a little more than a year from now, to that from number 2 to number 1. And that's why Cindy had mentioned, as we are looking at sulfur and we're looking at the model, we're really interested to see what's going to happen at the monitors when we look at our speciation data after that fuel switch takes place, to see if we see lower sulfur concentrations in the real world on our filters, because a lot of those space heating emissions are occurring down at that ground level, and it may provide us some additional insight into the sources of that sulfate that we see on the filters. I hope that helps.
So I think what I got from that was for the home heater that really is pinching their pennies, they'll have another winter with the availability of number 2. For those who want to get ahead of the curve regarding air quality, they can transition over to number 1, because that transition will be coming for next year. And then for the really aggressive, again, switching over to natural gas, which would be the cleanest of all.
Right, and natural gas does also has a lower sulfur. You know, it's lower sulfur than fuel oil. So yes, natural gas would be even cleaner in that regard with respect to both sulfur and particulates. So if they wish to convert, that's always a great option for reducing air pollution.
Okay, and so a shameless plug for our friends over at the Interior Gas Utility. Just so everyone can know that the pipes are installed in pretty much all of Fairbanks, all of core North Pole. Gas is available. We're at the end of the conversion season, but you can always get yourself on the list to be first in line for next season.
And I know the borough is doing a lot of conversions, and that's really exciting, because I do think that will have really long-term benefits in the community.
I thought, okay, well, it looks like we are at the very, very end. We've gone well over our time. I just want to say a very big, again, thank you to our friends over at the Department of Environmental Conservation. Actually, Commissioner Brune, I saw that you had taken yourself off mute. Sir, if you'd like to go ahead and give us the swan song, it'd be appreciated. And again, but thank you all so much for your efforts, your continuing efforts, both for our community, but also regarding the EPA, the ultimate regulator. Yeah, and trying to help us successfully mitigate this air quality challenge. Yes, Commissioner Brune.
Mr. Chair, you hit the nail on the head. Thank you so much for the opportunity today. If there are continued questions or recommendations, we're always willing to obviously listen. We've appreciated all of the insight that FEDC has given us over the years. And thank you so much for the opportunity to present today. And we're happy to come back at any point in the future, Mr. Chair.
All right, and you all stop calling me Mr. Chairman. We ain't that formal at this particular meeting. All right, well, everybody, thank you so much. Again, this was I knew when I saw this over at the chamber, this was an excellent. We needed to have this discussion. It's been about a year, and we were coming into this latest heating season. Just for the good of the order, I have, just so everybody knows, I have reached out to the Interior delegation about possibly being our guests for next week. If you haven't been watching, it's the third special session down the Alaska State Legislature. It is quite the show. So if you want to log into that, of course, you can go to just Google Alaska Legislature. They have a list of all the committee hearings, floor sessions. It's all being web streamed, so you can monitor that, and you can always reach out to your legislator if you have comments. But beyond that, again, if that comes together, of course, we'll have it, but I'll keep you all informed as to our next meeting. All right, well, thanks, everybody. Have a great week. And again, just check your inboxes as to what we will or will not have next week. All right, everybody, have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye.